to us that we find ourselves driven into another form of denial, not the denial of a shutdown of grief, but a denial that seeks refuge in addictions, seeks refuge in forms of life that cannot handle the dizzying force of that openness, and so has to kind of do a system shutdown that invokes a false sense of how one is open. For isn't that what all of our addictions do? Give us a false sense of that openness. But that openness that the cross holds before us, in its purest, most theological form, is an openness that we call grace.
Amen.
And that is an openness that sees in openness itself the truth that is love.
Praise God.
Now, this sounds so abstract, so out there, so, in a sense, again, Pollyannish. It is all about love. And yet, what does it mean to be a people who celebrate a courtyard, a space wide open to the sky, a space into which the world is invited to pour, all of it held in the embrace of a God who loves us?
Amen.
So my social theory of social change in the Reformed tradition is one that I have referred to as the theory of just breathe. Just breathe. Stay awake. Take in the moment in which we find ourselves. Cast off from your shoulders that ridiculous burden that says it is up to you to, in this moment, change history. Because what I have just described and what we all know, it is happening. It is happening, and it is going to happen as it roils through time and space, with or without us. Our task is not to force that history forward. Our task is to stay awake.
Amen.
I often think of myself at Union Theological Seminary as sitting on the back of a horse, no saddle, just holding on to the reins, flying through the night, sometimes in the midst of a storm, oftentimes in the midst of winds that are both refreshing and bracing, and not quite sure where it's going, but that horse's life. And that horse, if I can hold on to it, is the place to which God is calling that awakeness. The just part of breathing, however, gets us back to the justest dimensions of what it means to stay awake. For perhaps the biggest challenge of our day politically, in the midst of borders that are closing and worlds that are collapsing and imaginations that are flattening, is to be able to truly see there's enough oxygen in our body, enough blood flowing to awaken us. That person standing in front of ourselves is a child of God. And not just that one, but this one. And not just this one, but this entire country. This entire continent. This entire universe, the natural order itself.
Amen.
When Calvin stood there and looked around in the midst of this mess and began to write the Institutes of a Christian Religion, he first says, Serene Jones's version of the beginning of the Institutes, a lot of ink has been spilled on trying to figure out if we need to know who we are and then go looking for God, or perhaps the opposite, we need to know who God is and then we find ourselves. Calvin says, who knows? kind of abstract question. And then he backs up and he says, but this is what we know. And the first words out of his theological mouth about who God is the God who calls the world into being. And sets that world in motion and places us in the midst of it. That is what providence is. Providence is not some mysterious understanding that the Reformed tradition has about a secret book where everything is written. No, providence, if we believe in it, is the insistence that we are here in the midst of all of it which belongs to God. And our own lives also belong there. And they belong there with the cross imposed upon that creation in labyrinthian moments and abysmal moments, in collapsing worlds and expanding worlds, in a world where catastrophic violence and grace sit there together. Union Theological Seminary, for those of you who have been there, know, lives in an old building, 100 years old. Not as old as many of our churches, but still, 100 years is a long time. We have massive issues of deferred maintenance. Literally, gargoyles are falling off our facades. It's interesting, isn't it, to have buildings that are losing their facades. Their face is falling. Yet it's a strange experience that at the very moment the facades are beginning to crumble, the doors are bursting open. And we have students coming to seminary, and this is true not just at Union, but in many places, who would have never before considered seminary. We have people who have left the church. Young people who say, I'm spiritual but not religious, but still want wisdom, truth, and community, and come into our halls looking for it. We have similarly Roman Catholic students at a Protestant seminary. We have Pentecostal students at a mainline liberal seminary. We have Jewish and Muslim students coming to learn about Christianity at an ecumenical seminary for whom ecumenism has always meant intra-Christian. At the very moment the facades are falling, the doors are bursting open. And for me, one of the most powerful images to capture this sense of what's happening in our seminaries, what is happening in our world, is the story of a fountain. This past year, in the middle of the quadrangle at Union, Union sits in the middle between two very busy streets in the Upper West Side of New York. Buses pound by, smoke is always in the air, screams are heard from every street corner, sometimes of laughter, sometimes of agony. It's all right there pouring in. And in the middle of this massive Gothic structure is a quadrangle that on a summer's day you can actually hear birds sing. And students are time and again compelled just to sit there. This last year, our director of facilities, Mike Maloney, who doesn't have a theological education, but who, being the director of facilities at Union, has in fact been his theological education, and he has been to us a theological education, decides to put up a fountain. So one day it appears, smack in the middle on a nice concrete pedestal. It has a little plastic tube running from the bathroom in the corner to feed it water. And it's shooting out spurts of life. And it didn't take long before students were gathering around it, having picnics, reading books. People were coming in off the street.